Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is one that many believed would never happen. A moment written in blood, resilience, sacrifice, and history itself. Crimea retaken at last, the collapse of Russian control. This is not just a headline. This is the culmination of years of war, shattered assumptions, broken red lines, and a dramatic shift in the balance of power in Eastern Europe. What unfolded in Crimea was not a single battle or one sudden strike, but the final act of a long and grinding struggle that reshaped modern warfare and challenged the idea that occupation could last forever. To understand why the retaking of Crimea matters so deeply, we must go back to where it all began. Crimea was seized in 2014 during a time when the world hesitated, debated, and ultimately failed to respond with force. Russian troops, unmarked but unmistakable, moved swiftly. Government buildings were taken, a rushed referendum was held, and Crimea was declared part of Russia. For Moscow, it was portrayed as a historic correction. For Ukraine, it was a wound that never healed. For the international community, it became a frozen injustice, acknowledged but rarely challenged beyond sanctions and statements. For years, Crimea became a symbol of permanence. Russian flags flew over Sevastopol, the Black Sea Fleet expanded its presence, military bases were reinforced, air defenses were layered deep, and the peninsula was transformed into what many analysts called an unsinkable aircraft carrier. The message from Moscow was clear: Crimea is Russia, and it will never be given back. Even as the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022, many believed Crimea was untouchable, too fortified, too politically sensitive, too dangerous to challenge. But wars change realities, and realities change beliefs. Ukraine did not forget Crimea. Even when fighting raged in Kiev, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and later in Donbas and Zaporizhia, Crimea remained in Ukrainian hearts and military planning rooms. The leadership in Kiev understood something crucial. Without Crimea, Russia's grip on southern Ukraine weakens. With Crimea, Ukraine's security is never guaranteed. The peninsula was not just symbolic, it was strategic. Control of Crimea meant control of the Black Sea, missile launch platforms, logistics routes, and psychological dominance. The first cracks in Russian control appeared quietly. Ukrainian strikes began targeting ammunition depots, radar installations, and airfields deep inside Crimea. At first, Moscow dismissed them as accidents. Fires were explained away. Explosions were blamed on negligence. But the pattern grew impossible to hide. Russian air defenses were being tested, mapped, and slowly degraded. Ukrainian drones flew farther, smarter, and with increasing precision. Each successful strike sent a message: Crimea is not safe. Then came the attacks that shocked the world. Bridges, naval assets, and command centers were hit. The Kerch Bridge, the physical and symbolic lifeline between Russia and Crimea, became a recurring target. Each time it was damaged, repaired, and damaged again, confidence in Russian control eroded. Russian logistics grew strained, supplies slowed, reinforcements became vulnerable. What was once a secure rear area turned into a contested zone. Meanwhile, Ukraine was changing. Its military evolved into one of the most experienced fighting forces in the world. Western weapons, once used cautiously, became integrated seamlessly. Intelligence sharing reached unprecedented levels. Ukrainian commanders learned how to combine drones, missiles, electronic warfare, and conventional troops into a single deadly system. This was not the Ukraine of 2014 or even early 2022. This was a hardened, adaptive force fighting for survival and sovereignty. Russia, on the other hand, faced mounting problems: manpower shortages, morale issues, corruption, and internal political pressures began to show. Crimea, once a trophy, became a burden. Defending it required enormous resources. Air defense systems were pulled from other fronts, weakening Russian positions elsewhere. Troops stationed in Crimea lived under constant threat, knowing that nowhere was truly safe. The turning point did not come overnight. It came through a series of relentless operations designed to isolate Crimea before striking decisively. Ukrainian forces focused on cutting supply lines, destroying fuel depots, and neutralizing command structures. The goal was clear: make Crimea unsustainable for Russian occupation forces. As pressure increased, Russian evacuations quietly began. Families of officers were moved out. Valuable equipment was relocated or hidden. Yet publicly, Moscow maintained its defiant tone. Crimea was still Russia, they claimed. Any talk of withdrawal was dismissed as propaganda. Then reality hit hard. A coordinated Ukrainian offensive unfolded with precision and speed that stunned observers. Naval drones targeted Russian ships, forcing the Black Sea Fleet to retreat or relocate. Air bases were struck repeatedly, rendering aircraft unusable. Communication hubs went silent. Russian units found themselves cut off, confused, and under constant attack. Ukrainian forces did not rush blindly. They advanced methodically, exploiting weaknesses and avoiding unnecessary losses. On the ground, resistance varied. Some Russian units fought fiercely, others surrendered, and many simply withdrew. The myth of absolute Russian control collapsed rapidly once it became clear that reinforcements were not coming and air superiority was gone. Crimea, once considered impenetrable, was suddenly vulnerable from every direction. The moment Ukrainian forces raised their flag over key locations was not just a military victory. It was an emotional earthquake. For Ukrainians, it marked the return of stolen land. For Crimean Tatars, many of whom had suffered repression under Russian rule, it was a moment of hope and justice. For Russia, it was a humiliation on a scale unseen in decades. The collapse of Russian control in Crimea sent shockwaves across the world. Markets reacted. Governments scrambled to reassess strategies. Military analysts rewrote assumptions that had defined security thinking for years. The idea that borders seized by force could be permanent took a devastating blow. Inside Russia, the impact was severe. Crimea had been a pillar of national pride, used repeatedly to boost domestic support and legitimize the Kremlin's authority. Losing it shattered the image of invincibility. Questions once whispered became louder. How could this happen? Who was responsible? What comes next? Internationally, the consequences were just as profound. Allies of Ukraine saw proof that sustained support could change the course of history. Countries sitting on the fence were forced to reconsider their positions. The retaking of Crimea demonstrated that even the most entrenched occupations are not irreversible. But victory came at a cost. Ukraine paid dearly in lives, resources, and suffering. Cities were destroyed. Families were torn apart. Soldiers endured unimaginable hardship. The retaking of Crimea was not a clean, cinematic moment. It was the result of years of sacrifice. Every kilometer reclaimed was earned with blood and determination. What happens now is just as important as how it happened. Reintegrating Crimea presents enormous challenges. Infrastructure damaged by war must be rebuilt. Communities divided by years of propaganda must heal. Justice must be balanced with reconciliation. Ukraine faces the task of proving not just that it can win wars, but that it can build peace. For the global order, the collapse of Russian control in Crimea marks a defining chapter. It signals a shift away from the idea that military aggression goes unpunished if sustained long enough. It reinforces the principle that sovereignty matters, and that international law, though often violated, still has meaning when defended collectively. This moment will be studied in military academies, debated in political chambers, and remembered by generations. It will influence how future conflicts are fought and how alliances are formed. Crimea's retaking is not the end of the story, but it is a powerful statement about resilience and resolve. As the dust settles, one truth stands above all others. Control imposed by force is fragile. It may last years, even decades, but it can collapse when challenged by determination, unity, and sacrifice. Crimea's return is a reminder that history is never finished, and that even in the darkest times, change remains possible. So, as we reflect on the collapse of Russian control and the retaking of Crimea at last, remember that this was not inevitable. It was earned by soldiers who refused to give up, by civilians who endured occupation, and by a nation that believed its future was worth fighting for. This is more than a military victory. It is a message to the world. Occupation is not destiny. Power is not permanent, and freedom, no matter how delayed, can still prevail. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. History is unfolding before our eyes, and we'll continue to break it down, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.